Let's bring in Kevin. He's on the Menard Studio Hotline. Kevin Bowen, writer for Colts.com. Kevin, good afternoon. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it. When you look at this draft, and the Colts obviously don't pick till well down towards the end of the first round, which is a good thing when you make the AFC Championship. That's what that means. What does your gut say when you look at all the different needs that the team's going to need? When you look at this draft and that 29th pick, their first one, your gut says they're going to address what position?
My gut says defensive line, but in knowing Ryan Grigson and how he's operating these past drafts, I still go back to best player available. But again, for me, it's you got to look at that defensive side of the football. You've only picked one player on that side of the football in the first 4 rounds in these last 3 drafts. And now, obviously, the offense is played very well, and that's a byproduct of that when you draft guys like Andrew Luck and Kobe Fleener, T.Y. Hilton, and Dante Moncrief, and so on and so forth. But you've got to get younger on the defensive side of the ball. I think you've got to get better in the trenches. The AFC Championship game showed that. So that's why I go back to that defensive line need. You lost Corey Redding and Ricky Jean-Francois during the free agency period. You don't really have a ton of proven depth behind your starters up front on that defensive line. So I think finding an ideal 3-4 body, a guy that you can plug in that interior and stop the run, I think would be key. And I think there are some guys in that 20 range that the Colts would like to see fall to them on Thursday night.
Well, give us some of the names. Who are you talking about?
Malcolm Brown out of Texas, I think would be the most ideal name. I still think he could go in the late teens. Danny Shelton out of Washington is probably the top interior guy prospect. When you get past Leonard Williams, who's going to be probably a top 5 pick. So I think Malcolm Brown out of Texas, Eddie Goldman out of Florida State, those seem to be the 2 names that I think kind of are sticking in the early 20s. And you just got to hope, one of those guys falls to 29, or maybe if Malcolm Brown is there at 23 or 24, and you want to jump over the Lions, let's say, who are definitely in need for interior defensive linemen after what they lost in the free agency period, maybe you move up a little bit. So I think those are the 2 guys that I think fit that interior trench need for what the Colts want at pick 29.
With the breaking story or whatever you want to call it on Shane Ray out of Missouri, that could possibly drop him down late in the first. I mean, a lot of people are saying it could drop him completely out of the first, second, maybe even third round. But
right,
if he's on the board at 29 at a DN, would he fit what the Colts would be looking for, and would it be a move the Colts would be willing to make, even minus the marijuana thing, which wasn't a lot of marijuana, but it was a really stupid decision. But the toe and everything else involved, would that be something the Colts would be interested in to get a little bit of rushing off the edge?
I think there's multiple factors you got to take into when you're talking about edge rush need for the Colts. The first is Robert Mathis's health. If he is healthy, and again, that's a big if, a guy coming off an Achilles injury, and his game is so predicated on speed and his initial burst off the ball. So if he's healthy, I think you're all right at outside linebacker because you brought Trent Cole in free agency. Jonathan Newsom is one of the few young defensive pieces you have. Again, he made really the play of the year, I think, in that strip sack of Peyton Manning in that divisional round playoff win out in Denver. He deserves some reps. You still have Eric Walden coming off the edge as more of a run-stopping guy. So I think you have some depth there if Mathis is healthy. So that's why I don't think outside linebacker, edge rusher like Shane Ray is that big of a need. Now, if you don't feel like Mathis can come back and be the same player, or at least close to the same player that he was in 2013, then that pushes that need a little bit higher on the board. As far as Ray, I just don't see it happening. Ryan Grigson was pretty adamant at his pre-draft presser that the Colts are going to stay away from any of those guys with major red flags, and I think Shane Ray showed on Monday that he's got a major red flag. If this guy's doing that the week of the draft, really stay away from any of those guys until the later rounds where you do have some of those guys that have red flags that you just can't get away from. So I would be surprised if Shane Ray fell even to 29, because I do think some team is going to take him just because he is a top 5 or top 10 talent outside of all the off-the-field issues that are really this main off-the-field issue that he had earlier this week.
Kevin Bowen, Colts.com, joining us on the Menard Studio Hotline. Ford and O'Brien, ESPN Evansville 105.3, and online, ESPNEvansville.com. A name I see thrown around quite a bit in the mock drafts, and I know it's the mock drafts are nothing more than a crapshoot and guesses. I understand that, but it gives us some things to talk about and some possible scenarios to play around with as we get ready for the draft on Thursday. Safety is an issue for the Colts. They're very thin at safety, but this draft is also thin at safety. Landon Collins, a name that's been thrown around a lot, a guy who had a strong sophomore season at Alabama, but maybe a little bit of a not that he wasn't still very good his junior year, but the production slipped a little bit, and a guy that has some questions in the passing game, not so much in his run coverage. Is that a possibility in your mind? I mean, anything, I guess, could be a possibility, but could you see them going with him at the 29th pick?
I think definitely. And again, talked about Ryan Griggson's pre-draft presser last week. I mean, he spoke very glowingly of Landon Collins. He can do it all, was Ryan's phrase, and talking about him at the safety position and really comparing him to those other safeties. Like you said, it is a thin safety draft class. Landon Collins, by all accounts, is really the consensus number one guy. He is slipping, though, if you will. Again, it's hard to predict these mock drafts and just how accurate they are, but he's really slipping in all of them to the 20s, and I've even seen him pegged to 29 to the Colts. As far as that need, I think that would definitely fit. The Colts went out and got Dwight Lowry. He's a 7-year vet late in the free agency process, but not a really game-changing safety that I think Collins could potentially be. Like you said, he is more of a run-stopping guy. I think that could complement Mike Adams, who's coming off a Pro Bowl year, who is kind of the communicator back there, kind of spearheads that secondary, keeps Vontae Davis, Greg Toller, everybody really on the same page. So Collins could be that in-your-box type of safety. And again, the Colts are trying to stop the run in 2015, and Collins, I think, would help out in that area. And one interesting note I found earlier this week, I was reading USA Today, and Nate Davis, their football writer, talked about how the safety position of the last 7 teams, or the last 7 Super Bowls, of those 28 starting safeties in those Super Bowls, 20 were Pro Bowlers at some point in their career. So as the safety position seems to be devalued a little bit in college football with so many of these pass-happy offenses and these elite athletes are really going to the receiver position, the safety position is still a premium spot, I think, in the NFL. And the Colts don't really have a true game changer. Mike Adams was very good for them last year, but he's more of a sound guy, was in the right place at the right time. So I think if Collins is there at 29, you got to look long and hard in that. And based off Ryan Grigson's comments last week, he would almost run to the podium to make that pick.
Talking to Kevin Bowen, Colts.com. Do you see them? They bring in Frank Gore, obviously, what I think is going to be a fun player to watch this season, obviously trying to establish a running game to take some of that pressure off Andrew Luck. But Gore also entering the 10th year of his career. You've got Dan Herron behind him and Vic Ballard, if he can remain healthy. I know that's been a big concern of his over the last couple of seasons. Can you see them taking a running back at some point in the draft, maybe in one of the later rounds?
Definitely. I could see it as high as 2, really. I think there are some quality running backs outside of Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon. I know Tevin Coleman is a name that you guys down there have obviously seen play in college. Colts fans have obviously seen him play as well. He's a very intriguing name to Colts fans. Now, is he going to fall all the way to 61? By all accounts, it sounds like he had a pretty good pro day a couple weeks back, kind of quieted all those medical issues about his foot. So is he a guy that could fall to 61? It seems like a very deep running back class, something that Ryan Grigson touched on again earlier in the offseason. Mike Mayock, I think, said is the deepest running back class he's seen in the last 10 years. So I think the Colts will definitely take a running back at some point. You mentioned Frank Gore. You mentioned Boom Herron. The Vic Ballard thing, from a feel-good story, that's a guy that deserves to have a healthy offseason. He deserves to get back to what we saw in 2012 when, as a 5th-round pick, he really emerged. He was an 11-game starter, rushed for over 800 yards, but he's kind of the forgotten man and now in that 2012 draft class. So putting in any realistic expectations for Ballard in 2015 would just be unfair, coming off 2 non-contact season-ending injuries. So I think drafting a running back definitely makes sense. And as you guys know, in this league, you need multiple backs. The Colts have seen that over the past few years, from Ahmad Bradshaw's injury to Trent Richardson's, woeful performance. You need to rely on multiple backs over the course of a 16-game season. I think adding one would definitely make a ton of sense, especially when you have 9 picks.
Well, and I'm with you. I'd love to see Vic Ballard have an opportunity to show what he can do, because in that one season that he did have a great season, you can't forget the game against Tennessee where he made that dive into the end zone on the corner, and it was just I think there's a lot of potential there if he can just stay healthy. But if they can find, I think it's a mistake if they decide if a Todd Gurley or Melvin Gordon's at number 29. I don't think you take a running back first. But that's just me. I think there's bigger concerns to be had, and namely, regardless of who you've got there in the running game, you got to have a good offensive line to open some holes there. And I would imagine that at some point they're going to have to address that offensive line, whether it's the 29th pick or somewhere later on down the line. Who's some names that you've maybe heard as a guy or two that might fall to the Colts as far as a tackle or a guard might go?
Yeah, I think right now I'm looking at mock drafts, tackle and safety with this recent slide of Landon Collins. Those seem to be the two most popular picks that, all those pundits think for the Colts. Eric Flowers, a kid out of Miami, is a name that I see at 29. DJ Humphries from Florida. Andres Pete out of Stanford. Obviously, a ton of Stanford connections on this Colts team. He's a guy that I think will go higher than 29, but I've seen some earlier mock drafts that had him falling to the Colts. My only thing with tackle in the first round, and this goes back to Robert Mathis' health concern at outside linebacker, is if Gosder Chairless is healthy, which Ryan Grigson expects him to be ready in June, is that really a need in the first round? It's not a win now mentality for this Colts team, but you or I would be foolish to think this team is just a few pieces away. Do you really want to spend a first-round pick on a backup offensive tackle, on a tackle of the future once Chairless hangs it up? So I think it's one of those things. If Gosder Chairless is healthy, which is still a lot of concern, that's something that Jim Irsay mentioned as well. If he's healthy, I just don't see tackle as a first-round need. Maybe draft a tackle in more of the middle rounds as kind of a project. Let him develop. Joe Wright's the guy that you re-signed in free agency as well. He's a versatile guy that played well during the postseason when Chairless was on injured reserve. So I'm not as sold on offensive tackle as a first-round need. I think right now you can get by if Chairless is healthy. You brought over Todd Harriman in free agency as well. Plug him in at the right guard spot, him or Hugh Thornton competing for that spot. I think you can get by with what you have. I just see other needs at the top of the draft other than offensive tackle.
Gordon O'Brien, ESPN Evansville, 105.3 online, ESPNEvansville.com. Kevin Bowen of Colts.com, our guest on the Menard Studio Hotline. One last thing for you, Kevin, and then we'll let you go. You've had the opportunity to talk to both Frank Gore, Andre Johnson, other members of the team. How has the transition from their previous teams, how's that going with their kind of acclimating to the system and the surrounding of Indianapolis?
I think definitely good. It was kind of funny to hear Frank Gore and Andre Johnson talk about Andrew Luck so glowingly. You almost take it for granted in that locker room, but here's Andre Johnson. He's played a dozen years in the NFL, and he's had 2 days of Andrew Luck. This was last weekend talking, and he says he's probably the best quarterback that he's ever played with. And again, that doesn't do a lot of when you're playing with Matt Schaub and Case Keenum and all those different quarterbacks that he had down there in Houston. But I think that was a good infusion to bring those hungry veterans into this locker room, guys that kind of have a little bit of a swagger to them that aren't going to be in awe playing the Patriots. And if that is a mental hurdle, and if you are worried about that, Trent Cole touched on it, the new outside linebacker coming over from Philadelphia. We are here to take this team to the next jump. And when you have guys like Cole that's been in the league for 10 years, and Johnson 12 years, and Frank Gore 10 years, it seems like those guys kind of infuse that locker room with a little bit of some veteran leadership, which you lost in the offseason. When you lost Reggie Wayne, you lost Corey Redding, I think it's good that you have that balance. Guys that have been close. Frank Gore has made it to the Super Bowl. Trent Cole has made it to conference championship games. Andre Johnson has had some pretty good regular seasons in Houston, but hasn't tasted deep January runs. I think it's a good balance within that locker room right now of guys that are still productive, even though they have reached that age of 30 where so many teams are just scared to invest major money in those types of players.
Are you going to be heading up to Chicago for the draft?
We will not. I think, I've had some people ask me about that. It's one of those things where they invite about 22, I think, players to the green room, so there's a great chance that whoever the Colts pick at 29 is not going to be there.
Right.
So I'll be cooped up at West 56th Street at the complex, and you get that draft pick on a conference call within a couple minutes after the pick anyway. So I think the Colts will bring whoever is that first-round pick in here for a draft party on Saturday morning, and that'll kind of be the first introduction to who the new first-round pick is, because obviously last year you didn't have one with the Trent Richardson trade.
Right. Well, we'll keep an eye on Colts.com. We look forward to it. Thanks for the time. Great stuff today, Kevin, and we'll do it again soon.
Thanks, guys. Always appreciate it.